I've just been trying to stop my video. Okay. All right, let's get started on this. It is the gut-brain axis, and this is a deeper dive into understanding our nutrition and emotional response connected to the nutrition that we partake in. So let's get started. While all of this focus on our mental state and our programming is really important, we would do you a huge disservice if we weren't to talk about nutrition at all, because it does play a huge role in our state of being. There are actually many studies, and we will touch on a few of those that directly link adverse reactions, mental disorders like bipolar and even autism spectrum, having severe reactions to things like gluten and dairy. So we're gonna dive in now, a tale of two brains. So this idea is actually relatively new, that we actually have two brains in our body. One is obviously in our head and the other is your gut. So about 95% of our mood controlling hormones, serotonin, actually lives in our gut, or more than 95%. And the vagus nerve, or the vagus nerve, actually serves as the communication channel between the gut and the brain. So this acts as a highway between the brain and the gut. So all of this is actually caused by dysbiosis. So dysbiosis is an imbalance in the microbiome of our gut. This imbalance is linked with several mental illnesses, as well as anxiety and depression. So with dysbiosis, it can be in many different areas. Obviously, we're specifically talking about gut dysbiosis, but it is linked specifically to issues in the brain. So Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, multiple sclerosis, depression, anxiety, pain, stress. It's been linked to hypothyroidism, rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease, irritable bowel syndrome, ulcerative colitis, obesity, and type 2 diabetes, as well as cardiovascular disease. So this gut dysbiosis imbalance can actually also cause things like diarrhea, cramping, constipation, and a wide array of chronic symptoms, and even central nervous system disorders. So in order to understand dysbiosis, you need to know what the microbiome is. So the microbiome is a collection of microorganisms and viral particles that inhabit a particular environment. In this case, we're talking about the gut. So this is the amount or abundance of bacteria, and also includes fungi and viruses that are within an ecosystem. So we already mentioned what the communication highway was, but this gut-brain telephone goes in both directions. However, the messages that we're sending from the gut to the brain are significantly stronger than those from the brain down. So we're going to talk about the impact of stress on our gut bacteria. So the stress actually affects the abundance as well as the diversity of our gut bacteria. And this creates a secondary effect for our mood regulation through the gut-brain communication system. And this is also known as the HPA axis, which means hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal axis. That's what that stands for. So you can see all of these pathways. So beginning with psychological stress, this leads to anxiety and depression, which goes on to gut nervous system. That's directly affecting the nervous system, the vagus nerve, which affects the microbial metabolites, which creates systemic inflammation and HPA axis activation that leads to inflammation and gut permeability. So it's a big, crazy, all connected, and we're gonna get into what causes stress. Gluten. So this is an interesting conversation too, because gluten can cause celiac disease, which is an autoimmune disease characterized by the production of antibodies against proteins in the small intestine. Celiac disease is often accompanied by psychiatric symptoms, including anxiety, depression, and psychosis. In recent years, studies have shown that even those without celiac disease appear to have an abnormal immune reaction to gluten, causing a host of psychiatric symptoms. I myself have experienced this and have done multiple tests, and even have celiac disease in my family, but I don't actually test positive for celiac. But once I removed gluten for a lengthy period of time, I was able to substantially reduce my inflammation. I'll get into my story a little bit later, but this is a note from, this is one of the studies that actually proves the correlation between schizophrenia and celiac or gluten sensitivity. So people with schizophrenia, autism spectrum disorder, and bipolar disorder are actually more likely to have antibodies against gluten-derived peptides, which are short chain of amino acids resulting from the incomplete digestion of gluten. And we're going to talk about the digestion of gluten in just a minute, in their bloodstream than those in the general population. So levels of antibodies can be up to 4 times higher in people with schizophrenia compared to people without. There have been a number of published case reports of people with schizophrenia and autistic spectrum disorders improving on gluten-free diets. In 2015, a paper meticulously and convincingly documents the case of a 14-year-old Sicilian girl with severe psychotic symptoms, including hallucinations, paranoia, and suicidal thoughts due to non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So you do not have to be celiac positive to have a reaction to gluten. So we're going to talk about what you can do. So this is actually going beyond the gluten-free fad diets of alternatives of every single junk food that you ate when you were non-gluten free. This is autoimmune paleo or paleo. Autoimmune paleo is going to be the much more intense version of this. If you're dealing with some very severe symptoms, I'm always going to recommend the autoimmune paleo, and especially initially if you're just beginning to adjust into this lifestyle, you can really give yourself a boost by strictly going autoimmune paleo for a time. But this nutritional program is targeted to reduce inflammation, repair leaky gut, and restore balance in the gut microbiome. Grains, dairy, and certain types of vegetables and nuts and seeds are removed from the diet. This protocol has profound effects on this with autoimmune issues and psychological symptom patterns. So there was a 2015 study by Johns Hopkins, Columbia, where similar levels of anti-casein antibodies, casein is the primary protein in milk, were found in the bloodstream of people with and without schizophrenia, but those with schizophrenia tended to have higher antibody levels in the brain. So why no grains? That's pretty intense, but grains actually have something called anti-nutrients, and the coating on grain when ingested actually inhibits the body from absorbing nutrients at all. Additionally, they have a high level of neurotoxicity, gliadin, which is a protein, and it's able to cross the blood-brain barrier and can often bind with material that should not ever make its way to the brain. Gliadin, which is the protein that increases intestinal permeability, and I'll show you this in just a moment, but it actually pushes the cell walls further apart in both celiac and non-celiac test subjects. The next thing is lectins. So if you remember for a moment that a seed is a baby plant, it makes sense that the plant tries to protect itself. It does so through a coating of lectin. So lectin actually causes inflammation and damage to the GI tract. Lectin is present in all plants, but it's actually concentrated in seeds, which are known as babies, baby plants. And then it disrupts the endocrine system. So this contributes to insulin and leptin resistance, as well as interferes with the production of secretin, which leads to diabetes. So each causes stress and affects the gut microbiome. Every single one of these things is affecting us. So an anti-nutrient is a naturally occurring or synthetic compound that interferes with nutrient absorption. So phytic acid specifically reduces the availability of metals in our body. So it causes an iron and a zinc deficiency. Gallic acid decreases the bioavailability of amino acids. There's enzyme inhibitors, which reduces protein digestibility. Saponins, which affect the absorption of vitamin A and E and lipids. And lectins, which reduce nutrient absorption altogether. So phytic acid is a form of anti-nutrient that is found in all plant seeds. Phytic acid prevents the absorption of iron, zinc, and calcium, and it causes mineral deficiencies. So foods that are high in phytic acid are grains, all grains, legumes, nuts and seeds, and tubers. So out of all of these, if you were to have one in your diet, which I specifically do, I eat more of an autoimmune paleo style of diet at this point, but I do occasionally have tubers. An example of tubers would be sweet potatoes or potatoes. They're generally lower on the phytic acid scale. So talking a little bit more about lectin, which is a class of protein found in high volume in grains and legumes. This is a protein that binds to certain types of sugars, causing agglutination of certain types of cells. Agglutination in cells contributes to inflammation in the entire body. So this is a big one for people, and actually this is one I can speak to my own experience right now, but the psychological effects of dairy. So here's a tale of two culprits, casein and lactose. Each of these have been studied and proven to impact psychological conditions in certain neurodiverse populations. This says populations, that's amazing. I'm gonna tell Busy I found that. She's such a stickler for spell checking, I love it. All right, casein is the primary protein that's found in milk. Lactose is a type of sugar that's found in milk. So research shows that people with neuropsychiatric diseases, including schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety, and autism, often have significantly elevated immune reactions to casein in milk, which corresponds with the severity of their mental symptoms. And their symptoms can be improved substantially or even have been cured completely on a dairy-free diet. I notice when I take dairy out of my diet and when I add it, I find myself significantly more sad. So that's the way that it affects me personally, and it can affect people differently, but I have been able to eat such a clean diet and be so in tune with my body at this point that I understand each of the individual triggers. And much more, I notice it when it's not organic though, which is something to think about. But honestly, once I do this challenge that I'm going to tell you guys about in just a little bit, I'm looking forward to being off it entirely because I find that my self image is what's coming up in that emotion, that sadness. I'm finding that I'm down or negatively speaking to myself. It just overall affects me negatively. Now, I do still eat butter and plan to and ghee, and we'll talk about that here in just a minute, but specifically, um, like anything dairy, even if it's goat's milk or whatever, it is going to affect us in the same way with the casein and the lactose. So let's talk a little bit about leaky gut and the psychological impact. So we talked about how gluten will actually get into the intestine and create permeability. So this is a diagram showing you how it actually, the normal tight junction, if you're looking to the upper left-hand side, this is the way that it looks like healthy and normal and natural. But when we have all of these stressors affecting us and our permeability is affected, it actually gets in between and swells up between there, allowing our bloodstream to be exposed to things that don't belong. So over time, it begins this really mild symptoms, and then it becomes chronic and difficult to treat. But this is, layering up stress and toxins and using antibiotics and all of these different things add to it. So when our GI tract is all inflamed, it creates a sensitivity to things. So over the years, I became more and more sensitive to things that I was eating that I could have eaten previously and not realize that it was affecting me because, again, it was mild issues. And until it got to a point where it completely overtook my system and I had full-blown autoimmune issues that I had to deal with. And then I had to take things to the very, very, very far extreme and even become completely gluten-free and vegan, and at times even raw vegan for short periods of time. That itself, while it did help me drastically, it also had a negative effect on my body. I was never able to fully recover from all of the years of antibiotics and prescription medications and steroid injections and all of the things that my body had to go through physically, not to mention the emotional and spiritual effects that I was dealing with from my stress response living in a very chaotic environment. So I can attest to the crazy effect that our diet has to play on in our healing. And even after being gluten-free and vegan for 8 years, I realized it actually turned into another level of disorder where I had definite disordered eating and still a high level of anxiety and depression and poor self-image. All of these things I could not get my grips on until I started finding a balance within healing my leaky gut and healing the inflammation that was within my body. So this is hard for people to consider, eliminating all grains. And I know there are a few Italians on here. It's okay. We can get through. There's so many alternatives these days. There's a lot of options for grain-free, and they're readily available, and I'm happy to share any resources with you. But if you are truly committed to changing and at least altering drastically the way that your mind and your mood affects your life, give it your all for 30 days and then decide if you want to reintroduce grains. But this is going to include grains like quinoa and corn. Corn is actually a grain. Also eliminating dairy and dairy-based products, except for vegan products. But again, I'm not going to be ever recommending that you use any sort of vegetable oil because that is also extremely inflammatory. It's okay if you have grass-fed ghee or butter, like I said, because this is all high fat, and it's none of the proteins that you're trying to avoid. Additionally, you're going to eliminate legumes, and that means beans and peanuts, all nuts. Nuts are not a grain. That's more for autoimmune paleo. But like transitioning your diet in any way, you are going to have certain reactions. And especially when you're dealing with really intense autoimmune disease and disorder, you're going to experience what's called the Herxheimer response. Now, the older you are and the more toxic your system is, the more of a Herxheimer response you actually have. This means you may have symptoms like headaches, fatigue, dizziness, irritability, mood swings, nausea, intense cravings, sinus drainage, bowel changes, diarrhea, constipation, flu-like symptoms, brain fog, increased urination, increased appetite, increased thirst, and typically it gets worse around week 2 or 3. But I will tell you, you can greatly assist these symptoms by beginning to make wise choices in what you're eating and what you're eliminating and ease into it. I also will be offering you guys an opportunity to get a meal plan and be joining a challenge group that we can actually go through 30 days of accountability with a autoimmune paleo or paleo option. The straight paleo option would be for those who maybe have just had a baby, or they don't want to go as intense and they want to ease into it and begin with a paleo diet, but we'll get into that in just a bit. So if you're thinking that you cannot do all of that at once because it really is intense, this is a pyramid of importance so that you can understand the emotional and hormonal symptom patterns and you can begin to tune in with them quickly. So the most important thing you could do would be to go grain-free. The second would be to go dairy-free. Then choosing organically grown, and then humanely raised. So opting for things like grass-fed. And the reason why this is important too is we are a product of what we eat, right? What we are, we become. What our animals are fed, they are ingesting those nutrients into their cells and they become. If they're being fed GMO grain and slop, that is not going to be translating into a high quality of meat. So the nutrients are not going to be as dense. Is it essential for you to purchase it and to purchase grass-fed? And no, it's not. You can save money and still receive a lot of nutrients and benefits from eating traditional farm, not traditional farm, but more of a agri farm, big farm. You can actually get just as much benefit just by eating more protein in general and high fat protein. And the way that it affects your mood is significant. And I really preach this for women. We need to be eating more fat, especially butter and ghee, and higher fat red meat. Now, we don't need to be eating these large quantities and making it really hard on our digestive system, but we do need to be increasing our fat intake. Fat is our friend, especially when we're dealing with anxiety disorders and depression. Fat is very important for us. So these are the next steps. So you need to decide if you're willing to take the leap and how much your emotional stability is worth it to you. Ask yourself, can you take a chance on yourself and stay committed to something like this? And if you are and you want support, I can help you plan your transition and track your results. You just need to send me a message and let me know, and we'll set up a 90-minute consultation and get you started. Now, this consultation will actually get you set up so that you can go forward with your 30 days and you'll be having incremental check-ins with me. It's very minimal and very low cost, but we'll get you set up for success. But if you want to make your transition as smooth as possible by integrating a few key supplements, I want you to join in on our February group. And we're going to be doing an anxiety detox, and it's a 30-day accountability paired with the self-study accountability. So you'll be working through your journal again and looking at it from a little bit of a different perspective and really cementing a lot of that work in as well. We'll be doing exclusive meetups. We'll be meeting 3 times a week for bands, booty, and deep, which is super exciting. I know a lot of you will be pumped for that, but we'll be doing 3 exercises per week during that 30 days. So it ends up being about 12 workouts, which is super fun. I'm excited to boost my own fitness in that. I need this challenge as well. But during that 30 days, we will be going entirely processed free, gluten free, grain free, alcohol free. So this is a challenge for you to be able to get on top of your health and begin to feel that freedom, that lift when we begin to free our systems up of the toxicity that we hold on to. So I'm going to link in the Discord group. If you're needing a little bit more information, this is a great lecture to watch. Again, I'll be sending you that link. I'm going to go ahead and open it up to you guys if anyone has any questions or they want to share their own experience. If you've ever gone paleo, whatever you want to share, I want to open it up to you guys. Feel free to share your video. I'm going to stop my screen, pull my video up, and stop the recording.